Welcome to the Volk Furs Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Volk. The fur trade has a rich history dating back to the 1500s. How has it survived, and what is the future? I will take a look at the history of the fur trade, in-depth discussions on various topics pertaining to trapping, fur fashion, interviews with industry experts, and much more. If you are addicted to fur, this is your podcast. Hello, everybody. This is the Volk Furs Podcast. I am your host, Garrett Volk, and I think we're up to episode 9. Trying to do one once a week here, so it's been kind of hectic, but we're getting through it. On the call tonight, I have Tyler Webster. I met Tyler here a few years ago, and he called me up and wondered if I was buying some coyotes. So I bought a few coyotes from him and kind of kept in touch with him and over the years. So he is also the host of the Bird, Booze, and Buds podcast, and we'll talk a little bit about that. He is an avid upland hunter, so I'll stop introducing him, and he can tell you about himself. So, Tyler, welcome to the Volk Furs Podcast.
Hey, thanks, Garrett. I appreciate you having me, man.
How's it going?
Oh, not too bad. I'm definitely ready for winter to be over. It just seems like she's hanging on a little bit longer this year than she normally does. But I'm ready for some turkey season and some spring fishing and just being able to get outside here pretty quick.
You know, this April is coming up here, and I don't know. Do you remember what happened last April? We got 40 inches of snow and something.
Yeah. I remember that. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. But living where we live, I mean, it's always a possibility. But generally speaking, I mean, well, in fact, the day before that blizzard hit last year in April, I was out turkey hunting in a t-shirt. It was like 60 degrees outside. And then the next day we got 24 inches of snow or something like that in the first blizzard. And then we got another one 3 days later, and another one a week later after that. And it was like, oh my gosh, man, wasn't ready for that. But
yeah, I was over in the Stanley area here a couple of weeks ago, and I came by there, and you guys had just about as much snow as I think we did. So,
yeah, but the nice thing is, I mean, even today, I had to drive out to Stanley today. I've been staying in Minot for the winter because there's just nothing to do out on the farm this time of the year. It's kind of depressing. Yeah. But I had to run out to Stanley today to get some work done around the farm and just kind of prepare to move back in out there here in the next week or two. And even today, it was only 15 degrees outside, but there was still a decent amount of melting that was going on just because the sun's so hot right now. And the days are so long that, I mean, we get a couple days in the 40s and that snow disappears pretty darn quick.
Yeah, I had 10 below this morning when I took off for work. I thought that was a little chilly for this time of year, but I think tonight's going to be another cold night, and looks like maybe by the end of the following week, it's going to be in the 40s, but low 40s. But there's a lot of snow out there, and hopefully in about 3 weeks we're done with it. But we haven't had a storm for a few weeks yet, so I'm thinking we might get a late snowstorm. I saw a post on Facebook or something or Twitter yesterday, and I think they were referencing the Northern Plains, but they said April could be active. So I'm thinking people would rather have April showers than April snowstorms. But
definitely, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I remember many years where this time of the year I was already either chasing spring beaver or fishing or whatever the case may be. But I mean, this is one of the later springs we've had in quite a while, it seems like.
Yeah, I'd rather have a bad November and a really good March. So winter could come earlier for me, I guess. I mean, there's more things. I like to do a lot of hunting in November, so I'd rather have it snow free. But if I had to trade off, this April snow stuff gets old in a hurry.
Yeah, I mean, it's just speaking. Definitely, I like doing the majority of my pheasant hunting in November and even December most years. It's actually a little bit better for the birds to get it late than it is to get it early, because if we get it early, it just seems like it never goes away. And just speaking on it, as far as the birds go, which is what I mostly do these days, is chase birds around with my dogs. The later a winter starts, the better shape the birds are typically going to be in if we have to have a winter, I guess. You know, I mean, for the last 10 years, it seems like it's been, you know, little to no snow and pretty much open winters across most of the state. The best thing for the birds is to postpone that as long as possible and give them the shortest amount of time where they're struggling trying to find food, if that makes sense. But the April blizzards are always that wet, heavy snow, and it's equally nasty. So I mean, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen the other in my mind.
Yeah, there's quite a few birds out there all of a sudden again. I noticed this last couple of weeks in the morning, the birds have really been on the road, and I'm really surprised by the amount of pheasant numbers that are out there still. You know, those snowstorms and that cold weather, you know, they're not the smartest bird, it seems like, but you know, they've really survived well, and there's a lot of pheasants out there for this time of year still. I mean, there's some dead ones in the road, but like there always is, but there's quite a few. I'm thinking that the pheasant numbers this coming year are going to be outrageous again. What do you think?
I hope so. I mean, I think that the saving grace this year was, I mean, we ended up getting a lot of snow in December. But January was one of the warmest Januaries we've had in a very long time. And so it knocked back a lot of that snow that we did get early, and it kind of gave the birds a little bit of a reprieve. And then, like, it seems like it always happens, you know, we get a couple cold snaps there in February, and then this year it just happened. I think we got more snow in March than we got the rest of the winter pretty much. So, but that nice warm January, I think, was probably the saving grace for a lot of the critters out there. But I'm seeing a lot of pheasants around, a lot of Huns, a lot of Sharptails, and a lot of deer. But the deer do not look great. Looks like the deer are struggling a bit.
You know, I know I picked up my snares here. I had a few snares out this year, and not too many. I was out where I'm snaring is some cool areas where there's a lot of deer, and you know, I went out I pulled them early this year, probably around the 1st of March, and the deer at that point where I'm at, they've looked pretty healthy all winter. There's some other deer we've seen, you know, out of the area when we've just been traveling the weekends that do not look the best. But right. I think, you know, the food source is a big deal with the deer, and if they have a really good food source, they can get out of the weather. You know, that goes a long ways, and they're not harassed, of course, if they're, you know, around an area where they don't have to move very far with vehicles and across roads for bedding areas and food and stuff like that. But I'm surprised all the birds around there. I've seen a lot of Huns around on the road, you know, in the last a week or two now, all of a sudden, and the pheasants are crazy. Haven't seen many grouse. We got some grouse areas up here, but I haven't seen as many grouse as normal, but a lot of birds. So I'm excited. There's Muswelloo Pheasants has their annual pheasant release coming up this weekend.
Oh, nice.
And I usually get 10 hens to release out. You know, last year it was nice. I mean, the weather was nice, and then a week later I released those pheasants, and we got that 20 inches of snow. I'm like, oh great, they're all dead, right?
Yeah, probably.
And I think they survived because there's a lot of birds out where I released them. So that's coming up, and that'll add to the ever increasing populations of pheasants around here. And you know, I'm curious, and maybe you can answer this since you do a lot of upland hunting and stuff. You know, in the last 10 to 12 years, a lot of people have been trapping coyotes and calling coyotes and fox and all sorts of predators. And I can't imagine it's not helping the bird population. And usually this time of year, you don't see as many birds, and you know, especially on the roads and wherever they're at. You know, do you think those years of just a lot of predators taken off the landscape has helped the bird population to the fact to where the numbers are right now?
I mean, I definitely think it's a contributing factor. The kind of the thing that there's a couple studies that have been published both by Ducks Unlimited and Pheasants Forever here in the last several years. Coyotes actually provide a net benefit for pheasants compared to the number of birds that they take off the landscape, just because of the amount of other animals that they eat that'll also eat pheasants. So like the nest raiders, like raccoons and skunks and stuff like that, fox, coyotes will kill those critters more so than they'll actually, I mean, don't get me wrong. I have zero doubt. In fact, I've seen it where a coyote will take a pheasant, but they have a net positive effect on the birds just based on how many other animals that they eat. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, and that's what I was kind of curious about, because everybody talks about nest raiders and such, and it's really interesting because on our trap line the last couple of years, we haven't seen as many skunks and raccoons, those nest raiders, you typically, and you don't see as many fox, of course, because there's a lot of coyotes around, and they really killed all the fox. But that makes a lot of sense, and I wonder if people were out trapping just in general. There's always incidentals like skunk and raccoon and stuff like that.
Definitely.
If that definitely makes a difference. And I always, when you're thinking about predators and prey, you think, well, if there's more predators than prey, the prey are going to take it pretty bad. But we have a lot of predators around. I mean, you're out hunting all the time, and everybody's out chasing predators all the time, and there's never a shortage of them. And yet the birds are still surviving. So it's kind of nice to see, I guess. And maybe those nest raiders, maybe they're the ones that are actually getting taken out, and that's the big driving factor behind it, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think that up here in North Dakota specifically, it's definitely going to change based on where you are geographically. But up here for us, the factor is always the weather. Weather is always the main driving force behind whether we're going to have a lot of birds or no birds. And the deeper I get involved in the upland space, in the upland hunting space, and the more that I become aware of what makes a good year versus a bad year, it's multifaceted. So the years, the more I get into it, the more I kind of feel like a hunter, where it's like, oh my gosh, we need some snow. Oh, we don't need any snow, or we need rain, or that's too much rain, and that's honestly kind of what it is. The birds that I really like to chase, I mean, don't get me wrong, I like to shoot a pheasant. I love chasing pheasants, especially in the snow. But the birds that I really like to chase, the Huns and the Sharptails, they, excuse me, they are definitely more affected, less affected by the winter and more affected by spring rains. So the crucial time for all of our upland game birds in North Dakota is June. We don't want a really cold, wet stretch in June, because that's when those birds are first of all, if they haven't hatched yet, a lot of those nest initiations, and that nesting cover is a lot of times in the low-lying areas where there's better cover and all that kind of stuff. So it's a lot more susceptible to flash flooding and runoff. And then if that hen has to go and re-nest, they're always going to produce less eggs in their second nesting. So if we kind of like the perfect scenario for making a lot of birds, which is really what we've had now for the last several years, is you kind of want a mild winter. Snow's not bad. You just don't want that freezing rain and stuff like that, so that it freezes on top of the snow where the birds can't get through that to get down to the food. You don't want that. And then you really need to get some rain or some moisture in late April to start getting that grass to start growing, especially if you don't have a whole lot of snow for runoff. And we haven't for, other than last year, we really haven't for a while. And then after that, they're in pretty good shape, as long as we don't get that cold snap in June where you get like a week of temperatures in the low 60s with rain and drizzle all the time, because those baby chicks, they can't thermoregulate themselves well enough, and the mom has to try to keep them warm. And with all the upland game bird species, whether it's pheasants, Huns, or Sharptails here in North Dakota, if they have one chick that survives, they will not re-nest. But if they lose all the chicks, say a nest raider gets them, a raccoon comes in and eats all the eggs, whatever, they'll re-nest, and then they'll kind of give it a shot again. But if they have one chick that survives, that's all that bird's going to produce for the year. So if we get that cold snap in June, or a hailstorm or something like that, that's what's really devastating for the birds. And we've been lucky for the last several years, other than that brutal drought we had in 2017. We've had pretty darn good winters, and we've had pretty decent springs where we've had enough nesting cover kind of growing early, and we haven't had any of those cold snaps. We've had some rain, but it's been, it hasn't been terrible. So that's kind of the recipe as best as I know it, talking to the biologists at Pheasants Forever and stuff like that. That's kind of what the driving force in it is. I'm not saying that taking skunks and raccoons and stuff like that off the landscape doesn't help. And honestly, the other one that's really hard on the birds is farm cats and feral cats. They're really tough on them. They'll eat more pheasants than a coyote will in pretty short order, really. But if you can, it's kind of all of it together makes for really good success.
So let's talk about that trapping a little bit, nest raiders. So I'm not a bird biologist, and I hunt pheasants and Huns and Sharptails just like everybody else, and take my dog out, and that's what I enjoy. But I don't get deep into the bird part of it, and so this is where you're the expert as far as this next question. So if somebody was to had some property, and I'm trying to do that out kind of where my family has some stuff, to stock pheasants and make some habitat here over the next 5 years, and I want to make sure there's plenty of pheasants around, just for hunting purposes. They seem like they stick around farms a lot easier than some other birds, just for the kids and everything. So, if a person wants to control those nest raiders as far as trapping goes, what's the cycle of a bird as far as when they nest, when they when those chicks are about ready to hatch, the timing of, like, if I want to go out and control those skunks and control those raccoons and that type of stuff, when's the best time of that springtime, summertime to go after those predators that are out getting those nests?
Yeah, I would say this time of the year, really, like March, April, and maybe even early May. So kind of the general cycle is, and it's going to be a little bit different for all the species, but it's close. They say that the peak of the pheasant hatch here in North Dakota is about June 12th or so, right in that window. And I think Sharptails are about a week after that, and Huns are about a week after that. And so kind of that second half of June is kind of when everything's going to be hitting the landscape en masse, generally speaking, as far as young of the year birds go. But as far as trying to eliminate those nest raiders, this time of the year, and I mean, this as well as anybody does, those nest raiders are super active. The days are getting longer. Those raccoons are starting to get more and more active after they've been kind of half hibernating most of the winter. And the real thing is that there's not a lot of food on the landscape right now for them to eat. As the summer starts to go on, there's a lot more stuff for them to forage on, like, all the amphibians, like, especially when we're talking about raccoons and skunks, they're going to be living, generally speaking, fairly close to some marshy areas. So they got like the salamanders and frogs and stuff like that, not to mention just insects and grain and grass and everything else that there is out there to eat. And throughout the fall, they got all the crops and they got berries and everything else to eat. But this time of the year, when they start getting real active here in the spring, they're hungry and they're looking for food on a landscape that's kind of devoid of food. So when those birds start sitting on those nests, and those nests, like with all birds, those birds will produce an egg a day, and that's kind of why Huns end up hatching a little bit later, is because a Hun clutch can be up to 23 eggs, whereas a average pheasant clutch is going to be 10 to 13. And Sharptails are going to be right in that same 10 to 13 window. So they have a lot shorter time span from the time that they start laying eggs until the time they actually start incubating those eggs. Whereas Huns are actually going to go for a couple weeks longer because they're producing so darn many eggs. So when those birds start sitting on those nests in May, there's definitely some amphibians around. There's starting to be some insects, but there's not like the grasshoppers, stuff like that. The grass is starting to grow. But those birds are pretty vulnerable that time of the year. And it doesn't help that the birds kind of tend to give away the locations of the nests just so they avoid getting eaten. I can just picture a raccoon walking along the edge of a cattail, so they're smelling a pheasant, taking a couple steps towards it, and the pheasant takes off, and they're like, let's go and kind of investigate this. And they find 13 eggs there, and they just sit there and eat them. There's just not a lot of other things for him to do. So I got a buddy from Fargo named Sam Soholt. He's got a company called Public Land Teas, and he started doing he's been trying to start a program actually here in North Dakota, but he couldn't do it. But he wanted to have a raccoon hunting camp, or a raccoon hunting and trapping camp, and he wanted to call it like earn a tag, like go out there and kill 10 or 15 raccoons, and it kind of makes you feel a little bit better about buying a tag for turkey season or whatever. And he's more focused on it as far as the turkey hunting aspect of it goes. But those raccoons and skunks and fox are very equal opportunity nest raiders. It doesn't really matter to them what kind of nest it is. They're gonna eat it. But I thought it was a super good idea, and he's got a big social media presence and stuff like that. And he wanted to get, invite whoever wanted to come up, and kind of his initial plan was to do it down on the Cheyenne National Grasslands down south and west of Fargo, and just kind of give kind of like a little mini trapping seminar on how to go out and trap raccoons and skunks, and then you can go do some calling and all that kind of stuff, and go out there and try to put a dent in the nest raider population. But the Game and Fish wouldn't let them do it.
Why was that? Why was that?
Well, non-residents in North Dakota are not allowed to trap.
He was a non-resident. Okay.
No, he's a resident.
He's a resident.
Some of the people, yeah, but I mean, it would have had to have been just residents.
Okay.
They could have taken part in it. So they advised him against it. But I think he's doing it this year in Nebraska instead, where they have, you can go down there and you can buy a $50 trapping license or whatever, and go out there and try to clean out some of those critters. But to answer, I mean, it's a really long way to answer your question, but I mean, this time of the year is definitely a really good time of the year to be targeting those animals. And on top of that, trapping raccoons, between trapping raccoons and trapping muskrats, it's kind of like taking a kid bobber fishing for bluegill. Yeah. It's very simple. There's a lot of action. You're not going to, if you have 10 or 15 sets, good sets for raccoons, and go out there the next day, the chances of you having 8 to 10 raccoons are pretty darn good, especially if you can find those areas that they're going to be denned up in for the winter, whether it would be stands of old trees or old abandoned barns and farmsteads, or whatever the case may be. And you can see if they've been there and been active really easily. So you can end up putting out a very effective trap line with a minimal number of traps.
I've always wanted to do that, and after a long winter of trapping and hunting and buying fur and in the fur shed, by the time it gets warm like this, I'm always like, this sucks. So right. This year it hasn't been as busy for me because I haven't bought as much fur, and I'm working on coyotes right now. And since the beaver market's exploded in the last month or so, there's going to be some hot and heavy beaver stuff this spring whenever winter ends and the ice comes out. But
right.
trying to create kind of a habitat area and a bird sanctuary, so to speak, for hunting pheasants around some areas, I might try that this spring. Put out some dog proofs or some conibears or whatever a person has or needs to use around wherever you're at. I mean, I don't like conibears if there's a lot of non-targets around, but there's but the dog proofs work well too, and it'd be fun to it's probably a really good time to take kids out. And
definitely,
that's the thing about kids, is that kids need instant gratification nowadays. And like you said, you set 10 to 15 coyote traps, this time 10 to 15 raccoon traps out, and that the old farmsteads with the broken down barns and the granaries that have a hole in the bottom, there's raccoon in there, right?
Definitely.
And you take them out, you put the sets in, and you go back the next day, and I'm sure you'd catch some.
Definitely. And we used to do it quite a lot. The other ones that are actually really effective, like we used to trap around a lot of farms that were operating farms. I mean, they weren't even abandoned. And we'd use live traps, and live traps were super effective on catching raccoons.
Yeah.
And then you could make sure that you didn't end up with a barn cat and a conibear or something like that. It's kind of one of those things where if you are trapping around structures that are inhabited and they have pets, you can make sure that you're going to catch the right critter in a trap and dispatch that animal then. Whereas conibears, and I'm the same way. I'm very leery about conibears in like any kind of close proximity to anything, because they're indiscriminate. I mean, they're killers, and They're, it doesn't matter if somebody's dog gets out of their farm or whatever it might be. I mean, granted, I don't think a 220 is going to kill one of my bird dogs, but it's going to hurt them really bad.
Yeah.
And it's not a 330 or something like that would absolutely kill it, but it could. Those dog proof traps work great. And don't take the live traps out of your arsenal either.
So let's, I'm going to ask you a quick question here, just as it's on my notes here, and then we'll go back to some of this trapping, as far as, when you were younger and stuff. But have you had any experience, since you do a lot? See, I'm really leery, and I was on your podcast here back at the end of November, and we talked about a little bit about dog interaction. This time of year when the weather's getting nice, people are probably going to start taking their dogs out just to kind of let them stretch their legs and stuff like that. And I get really leery, especially with the snaring that's been going on the last, many years around here for coyotes and stuff. And now it's kind of subsided a little bit because of the market. But anyway, there's still people out there doing it. And then when you mentioned about conibears, there's not many people that use conibears anymore around here just because it's more of a water trap.
Right.
And there's some, these big, the big rat trappers still do, and the beaver guys will do it up in the turtles this spring, which I think we might try to go up there, do a little beaver trapping up there. But have you ever come across have you had any experience with your dogs with like a conibear or something like that? Because you see some of these pictures, these safety pictures, or these public service announcements from people, trying to, here's how you, try to avoid a trap, or what would you do if your hunting dog got in a trap, or anybody's dog. But, since you and I have hunting dogs and we're out in the field a lot, have you ever came across that or had experience with running into conibears or snares with your dogs?
Not with conibears. I have ran across several snares. Thankfully, none of my dogs have gotten into them. But once snaring season starts after deer season closes, and I'm hunting on, I just did a podcast this morning with a guy from Wisconsin, Doug Dern's his name. He's a contributor.
I listen to him on the Meat Eater a lot.
Yeah. I just had him on my podcast this morning. He reached out to me when he found out that I was elected the new president of the new Pheasants Forever chapter in Minot.
Yeah, and I just learned that, and that's one of the things I want to talk to you about later on. So keep that fresh in your head.
Yeah, sure. But one of the things about North Dakota that a lot of people who aren't from here don't understand is that North Dakota is 93% privately owned.
Yes.
And out of that 7% of the public land that we have in the state, the vast majority of it's in the southwest part of the state, down in the Little Missouri National Grassland. So one of the first things with that said, I end up hunting a ton of private property. I have a lot of relationships with landowners that I've hunted on their land for many years. And one of the first things that I ask them, since here in North Dakota, as a trapper, you have to have written permission from the landowner. They have to be aware that you're out there on their land. That's the first question I ask everybody nowadays, is do you have anybody out there snaring or trapping for coyotes? And if they say yes, I always ask them if they know, because a lot of these guys might own 10,000 acres. I don't want to not go and hunt any of their 10,000 acres if they're only trapping on a portion of it. And also, as a trapper myself, I know where the high target areas are for those for snares. But sadly, not sadly, because it's never been a problem for me. The best places that I know to snare coyotes, especially out by me, are either in brushy draws or in cattail sloughs. And those are also hot spots for pheasants. So if I can get that information from that landowner and know, where that guy's supposed to be having snares at, or if they don't have anybody out there, I'm much less worried about it. But that's always one of the things that I ask first. I've never came across any conibears. I did come across, have you ever used those, what we used to call it a box set, but it was basically like a wood box. It was probably a foot wide by a foot tall that had notches in it that you would put a conibear in the front of it.
Yeah, we made a bunch of those over the years. They work well, and we actually put a kind of an overhang on the top of it because people would say that if there's a little bit of an overhang, a dog wouldn't stick their head in there.
I don't know if I buy that. I mean, I've seen my dogs stick their heads down badger holes.
Yeah,
So,
I've never seen it in action work that way, but yeah, I know what you're talking about with those boxes.
yeah, but I ran across one of those one time. It didn't actually even have a conibear in it, which I thought was interesting. I was like, I know what that is, and I know why that's there because that's where I would set one of those for raccoons, but I don't know. There just wasn't a conibear in it. But it did make me a little bit leery about going back in that spot after that. And then I talked to the landowner and said he hadn't had somebody trapping out there for like 8 years.
Oh,
And so I don't know if the guy who was trapping out there before just pulled his conibear and left the box there and forgot about it, or if it was froze down, or whatever the case may be. But I ran across that. I have, however, ran across several dirt hole sets in fields, and anybody who's a trapper, you can spot I can spot those things from a long damn ways away. Like, I mean, I just know what my sets look like. I know what their set should look like. I mean, you know, you got the classic rock, and then the hole. We always put a hole right at the base of the rock, and then offset like 9 inches back or whatever it is off to one side or the other.
Same with us.
I've spotted several of those, and then just kind of steered my dogs away from it. Except for there was one example of a guy who I'm very good friends with the landowner, and I called him and asked him if he had anybody out there trapping. He said he hadn't given anybody permission to trap out there, and I noticed that, and I walked over and I snapped it, and then left a little note in the jaws of the trap saying, you know, just an FYI, you do need to have written permission from the landowner to be out here, and he doesn't know that you're out here. So it's just kind of a little public service announcement to that particular trapper who was trying to be sneaky and didn't take the. And the other thing is that landowner would have 100% given him permission. He just was too lazy to actually go and ask for it. So I just wanted to leave my little mark on that one a little bit. But the snares are the ones that do concern me. And whether you're hunting the edges of cattails or wooded draws or whatever, those are going to be the spots that we're going to snare. Those are also going to be the spots that we're going to hunt pheasants in. One of the things that I think people don't do enough with their dogs that I do is I put my dogs on tie-out stakes during the summertime when we're at the lake or whatever, and it just teaches them not to pull. So, like, if they're sitting there and they're on a tie-out stake that has a piece of chain on it that's a foot long or 18 inches long, they don't sit out there and pull on it at the end of their chain and choke themselves out. It's the same philosophy with walking them on a leash or whatever it might be. It's all the same thing that will teach them, if they do get stuck in a snare, not to freak out and start pulling. And once they start freaking out and pulling on it and thrashing around, even if you have wire cutters, which I always carry in my bird vest, it can be really hard to get that cut without injuring the dog just with the wire cutters, or it can be too late. I mean, because my dogs are pretty big running pointing dogs, and they can be out there hunting at 200-300 yards sometimes. And if they get into a snare and they freak out at 300 yards, I'm not going to get there in time to save it, most likely.
Right.
But yeah, I've never encountered conibears in the wild like that.
Do you think, you know, going back to your putting your dogs out on tie-outs, you know, in order to train my Springer years ago, I used a training collar. I mean, I'll call it a choker chain. I don't know what you call them now, but just for corrections and stuff when, you know, teaching to heel and stuff like that years ago. And of course, after a while, if you got a really smart dog, they'll realize, I better not do that. You know, right. that's a bad thing. Is there any particular type of tie out that would help that? I mean, if they feel some discomfort and it, you know, kind of something goes off in their brain saying, oh, wow, this isn't good. This hurt before. Is there any particular tie out that would work best if you're really concerned about it, if you're really in, you know, heavily snared areas that you're kind of worried about that? Or is it just a regular leash would work fine, you think? How do you think dogs react to that as far as...
There's actually a scientific name for it, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but there's something that's innate in a dog that when it feels resistance, that it actually wants to pull. You know, that's why, you know, like huskies and stuff like that pull dog sleds, right? So it's just kind of teaching them that that's not okay. So like when I teach my dogs to heel, I'll just walk them with just a normal leash but I'll teach them that if they start pulling, I stop, and I'll make them come back and stand next to me again. And, you do that a little while, and you stop periodically, and they kind of have to pay attention to you walking or they're walking at your pace instead of you walking at theirs. It kind of just teaches them on their own that if I pull, it's not good. Dad doesn't like it if I pull.
Right.
And it's kind of the same thing on a tie out stake, but it's kind of like heel training, but for the lazy guy, which is what I am. Like you put them on a tie out stake, and they just kind of have to learn all on their own that doesn't matter how much I pull, I'm not going to go anywhere. So I can just lay down here or sit here and relax, and it doesn't hurt my neck. Or I can pull and be an idiot and freak out, and I don't get to go anywhere anyways, and Dad yells at me. So, we've all seen those people that are walking their dog on a leash, and the dog's walking on two legs all the way out there on the end of the leash, just pulling as hard as they can. I guarantee you that those are the dogs that are going to be in real trouble if they ever get into a snare.
Right.
Those are the ones that have never learned that it's not acceptable for them to pull. It's just kind of one of those things. I mean, I had a buddy 3 years ago, not very far from my house out by Stanley. We were walking along, and the guy who traps out there, I know him, and he stopped and said that he had some footholds out in a particular field. And we were out there, and one of his dogs got caught by the pad in a I think it was a number 2 coil spring or something like that. It's gonna startle the dog, but it's not gonna hurt the dog, right? But that dog just sat there holding his foot up with that trap on his foot. Whereas if he would have started pulling and wrenching, all of a sudden now you got broken bones maybe, or some fur scraped off the top of their foot or whatever the case may be. But his dog just understood that, that kind of sucks. Dad will come over here and help me in a minute. And it's all kind of the same mentality where they just kind of need to understand that if I don't freak out, I'll be okay. I can just settle down, and it's going to be more comfortable.
Right.
Excuse me. But it's all just kind of teaching them how to be a good citizen, really. It doesn't have to be super, super complicated. Just teach them that when they start pulling on that lead, it's not okay. You just give them a little pop on the lead and make them come back to your side. So,
one more bird-related question here. So you tell me a little bit about your pheasant deal that you just kind of got involved in.
Yeah. So I'd gotten some notifications, some emails saying, and some messages on Instagram and stuff like that, that they were trying to start, or they were starting a Minot chapter of Pheasants Forever. Minot's the last big city in North Dakota that doesn't have a chapter. There's a huge hunting community in North Dakota, and for some reason or another, we just don't have a chapter. So I ended up getting a second email. I wasn't able to go to the first meeting, but I went to the second meeting. And at the second meeting, that was kind of when they were picking their officers, and so or their board members. So I'm just kind of sitting there, I ended up knowing a bunch of the people that were there, and nobody, when Renee Tomala, she works for Pheasants Forever out of Bismarck, she was running the meeting and hosting it and everything else, and she said, well, who wants to nominate, or who do you think we should nominate as president? And nobody raised their hand. And then Renee, who I know from Pheasant Fest and a bunch of other, through doing some TV shows and stuff like that, I just know her. She said, well, I nominate Tyler. And then like half the hands in the room went up. And I was like, oh, son of a gun. Like, I just wanted to come to a meeting and see what was going on.
You're right.
Anyways, I was both nervous and excited to get the chance. But, the way that I told everybody, I said, we're all kind of starting this together, and we all need to know that I don't know what I'm doing, and you guys probably don't know what you're doing. So as long as we all kind of help out and cover each other's butts a little bit, then we can probably get through this thing unscathed. And so, yeah, I mean, we're going to have our first ever event. Is going to be at Buffalo Wild Wings, April 21st. We're going to have a pint night. We're calling it. Oh, what the heck? What the heck are we calling it? Hold on just a second. I'm going to check my email. She come up with a good name for it. I'll find it. But anyways, we're gonna have a pint night from 5 to 8, and we're gonna give away a bunch of door prizes and stuff like that. I just talked to Dog for Collars. They're gonna donate a collar for it. I had talked to a bunch of other people that are gonna donate some stuff. So we're gonna have a bunch of really nice prizes. And people are gonna come up, kind of do a membership drive, that kind of stuff. And she's calling it, and I really like the name. Come on now, open. Oh, dang it. I'll find it. Anyways, we're going to have just kind of a membership drive. I told like 6 or 7 of my friends that they don't have a choice. They're going to come with me one way or the other, whether I have to drag them kicking or screaming or not. And we're going to give away some stuff, and we're going to try to just kind of start growing the community kind of as organically as we possibly can. And, just kind of go from there and see what happens.
Well, I know how passionate you are about bird hunting and birds, and I'm sure, Tyler, you'll do a fantastic job as board president of that.
Well, I sure hope so. I mean, it's a little bit nerve-wracking because I don't really have any experience in longtails and ales is what we're calling it.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah. So Onyx, they're one of my podcast sponsors. They're going to donate a bunch of Onyx memberships and hats and T-shirts and stuff like that. So we got all kinds of prizes. But it's nerve-wracking, but at the same time, it's kind of exciting because it does. I know that there's a big passion for it here in this area, and I think like our 3 main pillars as a chapter going forward are going to be improve and increase access. So we're going to do habitat deals with landowners that allow hunters, whether it be youth hunters or adults, either way. And then we're going to do a bunch of youth events as far as we're going to do like some youth hunts when the youth pheasant season's here. We're going to get some mentors together, some bird dogs together, a few kids, probably do 1 mentor per 2 kids or 2 per 2 or something like that. Take them out and actually hopefully try to get them their first bird, or just kind of show them how the dogs work. Kind of do some safe handling clinics as far as this is how you hunt over a bird dog, whether it's a pointer or a flusher. Do some trap shooting stuff with them, and then just kind of try to grow access and habitat and bird numbers, as well as trying to grow hunter interaction.
Some of the, if somebody would ask me the top 2 things, well, top 3, but 2 of them go hand in hand. The top 2 things that I worry about with the outdoor industry, whether it be hunting, fishing, maybe not so much fishing, but hunting, whether it be deer hunting, upland hunting, maybe trapping, stuff like that, is number 1 is youth involvement. Number 2 is habitat and access.
Yeah.
And the youth nowadays, they're just not exposed to the things that get them into being a hunter or a trapper, or something. Like I was explaining on an episode just last week with James O'Neill with O'Neill Ops. I had them on, and we're talking about how, especially us farmers that grew up farming, there were a lot more farms back then. There were a lot more kids exposed to the outdoors, and they just naturally were hunters just because they're outside, they're at the farm, they're doing whatever. Well, there's the farms are getting bigger. There's not as many families involved in that, and they're not taking in the outdoors. So in order to get the youth involved is great. Any organization that wants to get the youth involved and get them access to hunt. So the access and the habitat's really concerning to me because a lot of habitat is coming out or going down.
Right.
And, it hurts the wildlife and areas for them to be. And of course it also, limits, us as hunters for hunting access.
Right. So I think that it actually just closed here. Either did close or it closed last week, or it closes this week. I can't remember, but there's still CRP signups. I've been talking to a lot of my friends and landowners that I told them, I mean, CRP prices have gone up in the last couple farm bills, which is good. Trying to put some more CRP back on the landscape. But one of the things that Pheasants Forever does that's great that farmers like you guys actually might be really interested in is they do something that Bob St. Pierre calls it farm the best, conserve the rest.
Mm-hmm.
So they have these targeted ag specialists that can come out and actually sit down with the landowner and go over your crop history from years past and figure out actually what it's costing the landowner to farm some of those less than ideal pieces of property when you're figuring seed and fertilizer and the fuel cost to actually combine some of the stuff. You'd actually be better off putting some of that stuff back into habitat instead of trying to farm it. And the Pheasants Forever farm biologists that we have a really good one here in Minot named Warren. They'll actually come out and sit down and talk with you and figure out, what of your land you should be farming and what of it is actually costing you money in the long run. And that, I think, is going to be where we're gonna focus a lot, because there's so much of those little low-lying areas that end up getting wet 4 years out of 10, and they're just weedy and not any good. And some of those spots like that we could leave that habitat on the landscape or plant back new habitat. And Pheasants Forever will take, I think it's 70% of the seed of the cost to reseed some of that stuff. They'll actually pay for the seed to go back into the ground. You can put native grass mixes or pollinator habitat or whatever it might be into some of those spots that are actually costing the landowners money to farm it. Even though every once in a while they'll have a year where everything works out and they do get a crop off it, but most years they don't.
Yeah, that's that kind of, you see that where there's land that's barely growing a crop. It's like, geez, maybe that's a little bit better for some grass or something like that. Or
definitely,
I think all the trees in North Dakota, I think they were put in way back in the day because the farming practices and such were conducive to drought and topsoil
wind erosion
and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so now that the farming practices are way different, of course, and there's not 50-50, 50% summer fall and 50% crop anymore. So the need for trees and stuff like that are going by the wayside. But yeah, habitat to me is a big thing. And I see it around here a lot is trees going down, grasslands coming up that probably should stay in, and just because it probably was put in for a reason. And it's right. Nice. It's nice to hear that the CRP program is alive and well, and some of those payments are increasing.
Yeah, I think I don't quote me on this, but I believe that this year in the new CRP signups, I believe they're paying up to $50 an acre. So I mean, and one of the things that you can figure out is you can double dip. So you can put something into CRP and then put it back into plots. And all of a sudden, that piece of land that's actually not really producing much of a crop at all, you're getting paid, $60, $70, $80 an acre to have it in CRP that's open access to public hunting. So there's ways that landowners nowadays can find those parcels. And I mean, I'm 100% sure that every landowner out there that has, more than 5,000 acres has a quarter that, if you sit down and look at the books, it's probably not really good for much else. And even if $50 an acre is still quite a chunk, but if you wanted to open it up to public access through the plots program, you could do both and end up making a pretty nice little sum off a parcel of land that you might not be making any money, or in fact, it might be costing you money every year.
That's a good point. I mean, that's something that maybe not everybody thinks about. You could be providing for the wildlife, being more efficient on your farm, which is, a goal of a lot of farmers nowadays, just because of the high input costs and the risk that these farmers take on. So that's, Good argument. That's a really good speech there. I like that.
Thanks. I haven't even worked on that. That was just
You
off
haven't
the
even
top of
worked
my
on
head.
it. So it's going to get better then when you fine tune it then, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm going to be working on that. And that's kind of the other part of our chapter here that, or at least my main focus as far as the president of the chapter is when we start making money as a chapter. One of the great things about Pheasants Forever, and I don't want this to turn into just a infomercial for Pheasants Forever, but they got a great model. So the only thing that national level Pheasants Forever gets out of every chapter is membership money. That's it. They get $35 a year per member. That's all that they get. Everything else that we raise, we get to decide as a chapter what we do with that money. So say we have a banquet next year in January, which is kind of what we're planning now. Towards the end of January, we're going to have a big banquet. Say we raise $50,000. We get to decide as a chapter where to put that $50,000. Our goal is to have a zero balance in our bank account at all time. We want to put back everything that we make from the chapter, either into access, habitat, or helping bring more youth recruitment, I guess would be the best way to put it. But us as a chapter, or me specifically, as long as I'm president of the chapter, I don't necessarily want to give landowners money that aren't already allowing access. Now, whether that would be coming up with some sort of signs that say, call this number if you want to hunt, or, whatever it is. But there are some landowners out there now, and probably with good reason. Maybe they hunt themselves, or whatever the case may be, or maybe they've just had really bad interactions with hunters or trappers over the years that do not allow access on their land. Maybe they have a big family that's really active in the outdoors. If that's the case, I totally understand. But I'm not going to give them money from our that we're going to raise to help out the habitat on those pieces of land that we're not actually going to be able to access as a public. There's got to be some sort of a common ground there, and I understand that Pheasants Forever proper has the stance that even those parcels of land, if it's really good land, the pheasants that are raised on there spill out into other pieces of land that you can hunt. That's fine. But for this chapter here, we're gonna have access as one of the main pillars as well.
Well, I like that idea. I mean, I'm all for that. I mean, I think if somebody wants to improve and help, I think that they need to allow access to, just because it helps everybody. I mean, you don't have to have access to the whole farm, and that's because there's a lot of families that do hunt their own stuff, and that's all they hunt.
Sure.
But, that's great. But I think if they allow people to hunt, yeah, I think that's reasonable. Now, what's a membership cost then for that chapter?
It's just $35 a year is all that it is.
Oh, wow.
And then with that, that money goes back to National Pheasants Forever. You'll go on our membership list, and then for our banquet that we'll have next year, end of January, it'll be $35. That comes with a meal, probably some free beer, all that kind of stuff, and then the money that's going to be our big fundraiser for the year. That's how we're going to make the majority of our money, is through that. But yeah, I mean, it's just a $35 membership fee is all that it is.
Oh, that doesn't sound like too bad of a deal. Support a good cause, and
that's right.
Especially members and potential members can understand what your chapter is going to do and how you're going to distribute those funds for access or habitat or whatever. People really like to know the value they're getting by pouring their time and their money into something. Yep. And when you can, show the value and talk about the value and actually see projects go into place over the years of raising money, I mean, I think that just reinforces your mission and makes it really easy to bring people into your group. And that's what we need. I mean, we're losing, I don't know the numbers, but you just know that we're not gaining hunters and trappers every year. I mean, but to be able to have groups like this group, and to do good projects and get that money back out there to help with access and habitat and all sorts of things, especially for youth and anybody, that's a great group to be a part of when it works like that.
Definitely. And I think that we are gaining hunters. And we're definitely gaining hunters. The statistics are out on that, but I mean, trapping is kind of is kind of a lost art form nowadays. But we're losing the older generation that's been hunting for so long,
right?
And maybe they haven't been actively hunting, a whole lot. Maybe they get to go out and for an opening weekend of pheasant season or deer hunting or whatever it may be. But those people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s now, they're aged out. But the ones that we have coming in are young and passionate. That's the nice thing that I see when I go all around the country is that there's a lot of 20-somethings that are coming to it on their own, which is amazing. There's this huge phenomena going on right now that's got a name. They call it adult onset hunting, and these people are kind of starting. It kind of all started with people wanting to find a sustainable organic food source, and then they came into hunting, or they bought a bird dog, or whatever it may be. But I think we are gaining some hunters. We're not gaining the children that we need to be gaining for sure.
Yeah.
And that's where when we're going to do like some of the handling clinics and stuff like that, when the proper way to hunt over a dog and all that kind of stuff, you start throwing dogs into the mix, and kids are excited anyways. I know I was at the very least. So, I mean, that's kind of the hook set into them for a lifelong of outdoor passions.
Yeah, that's a good turn off on the next topic I want to talk about here. And it's interesting you mentioned the adult onset hunting, because when I look at new hunters, I look at, my kids are younger, and the amount of friends that they have to get into hunting, it just seems like it's not as explosive as it was when I was that age.
Right.
But interesting you said that about adult onset hunting, because I was on I had an episode here with I think it was Jeremiah Wood is when I was talking to them. He's a beaver trapper, Martin Fisher trapper out of Maine, and he's got Trapping Today podcast and has a website and stuff, and has really a lot of good content. And I think it was him. We were talking about trapping and people getting into trapping. Of course, it's a dying sport, just because a lot of the old timers, they're passing on or not trapping anymore because of age, and it's kind of a family tradition thing. And it's not taught. It's not flashy. It's not, all glitzy as far as some of this hunting stuff you can do. But one of the things that he mentioned is that there's a age group there. I don't know if he mentioned it was millennial or what age group that was, that are looking more towards, like you said, sustainable living, but also with like, I can trap some of this stuff and use the fur or maybe if you're in the part of the country that they eat muskrat and beaver. I mean, there's a lot of muskrat dinners out in the East Coast. They can do that and live sustainably and get more things off of this earth instead of out of a factory, which, is kind of the big movement the last however many years. So that's interesting you said that. And it's interesting that it's that age group. It's kind of like the older you get, then all of a sudden you realize that, maybe you didn't have a background in it because the kids aren't getting into it as much. But then after you get old enough to think for yourself and say, hey, this is kind of cool. When I first heard that a while back, it kind of didn't blow my mind, but I'm like, usually you get into something because of the generation before you, like
right,
your parents, your grandparents, kind of like you. I mean, when you were younger, do you remember trapping from as early as you can remember for your family?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my grandpa told stories of taking me trapping in a car seat. Just out checking traps and stuff like that. But I remember I started carrying a shotgun when I was for bird hunting when I was 8, and I was trapping with him every year up to that point. I wasn't strong enough to set my own traps or anything like that. I think I set my own trap when I was like 10, and I started trapping with him. And I mean, that was the thing that we look forward to the most. I mean, we didn't have bird dogs. We liked to go bird hunting, but I mean, our idea of bird hunting was just go out there and pound cover and hopefully find birds. It's a little bit of a different, less effective strategy than what I currently employ. But trapping season was the thing that I looked forward to the most. As long as I maintained good grades in school, which I always did, the way that we would always do it is we would wrap the first weekend that we'd trap around Columbus Day in October. So we'd start setting it Friday after school, set all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and checking the traps we'd set the previous day. And then we'd run that trap line through that whole week. And my mom would let me take off that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then that whole next weekend. And then I'd get to take off Monday, Tuesday. So I essentially got basically 2 full weeks of trapping every fall with my grandpa from the time I was 6 years old or 7 years old until I was in high school. My grandpa passed away when I was 18, but I think we had a trap line until I was 16. And then I set a trap line of my own. He passed away from cancer, but he was able to go out and actually go with me and ride around on my trap line when I was 17. So yeah, I mean, my whole life.
Those are memories that a person never forgets. I mean, that's, you know, for me, you know, learning to hunt or whatever, there's 2 really, you know, moments that, you know, because my family never was a trapping family, so I never really had to learn trapping on my own and from a neighbor and just from doing other stuff. But those moments, you know, one of the things I always remember was, you know, the opening of deer gun season. That was like the big thing with our family, right? I mean, it was a state holiday. In fact, I think North Dakota probably should just take the dang day off. I mean, nobody's in school, at least when I was in high school. But there's certain things, and then of course, being young like that, and you're impressionable, and you take everything in like a sponge. You just continue to do that. I mean, until
I think a lot of it has to do though too is that when we were kids, and I'm 39, I think we're roughly the same age.
I'm 44. I just turned 44, but we're pretty close.
There wasn't a lot else to do then either. I mean, like nowadays there's so many distractions. I mean, there's different sports every day of the week. There's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. There's they're getting bombarded with social media. They're in drama and band and everything else. For me, I played baseball during the summertime, and I didn't play football because that was my favorite season of the year, was trapping and hunting.
Right.
And that's kind of I wasn't taking off a Saturday or whatever to go play football when it was season to do that. But nowadays there's so many distractions where it all just kind of gets, I mean, there's only so many hours in a day, and there's just so many distractions that are kind of year round for kids nowadays. It's really hard for them to find that. That's kind of why I'm really happy that the scholastic shooting programs have started to really take hold, the scholastic shooting teams for trap and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because it's a school activity now. And that's hugely important. And I guarantee you that any of the kids that are on the scholastic shooting team, they're going to be out there pheasant hunting on opening day. I 100% guarantee that. There's no chance that they're not. If it's something that they're passionate about enough where they're taking away time from their other school activities to do it, they're going to be outdoorsmen. They're going to be hunters. So that gives me a lot of hope that there is at least something there where it kind of helps them compete, or it helps us compete as outdoorsmen compared to, you know, just watching everything else just kind of go by the wayside.
You know, that's interesting you said that, because, you know, I have 5 kids, and my oldest, he's a hunter. He's into it a little bit, but he'd rather, but you know, he's at that age, he's, you know, junior in college, and there's lots of things going on, you know, being a junior in college. But I think, you know, perfect example is my oldest daughter. She was it 7th grade or 8th grade, but she got in the trap team, and I was the first year that we had a trap team up here at MLS. I was the head coach of the trap team, just for the simple fact that my oldest son was on the trap team and they need a coach. So, I mean, not that I'm a trap shooter. I mean, I shoot trap, but I'm not an expert trap shooter. But she did very well her first fall season. Then she kept going, And she never shot a shotgun up to that point. I mean, even though we're a hunting family, she had just no interest. And maybe it was because it wasn't cool and she wasn't with her friends or whatever. But now she wants to go pheasant hunting. She went deer hunting with me. She got into hunting. She got a tag last year. She didn't get a deer, but she's really interested in it now. And I'm convinced 100% that it was just because of that trap shooting. I mean, we'd go hunting and she'd like to drive around and watch me hunt and everything like that. But she got a taste of that part of it. And now she's probably going to be a hunter forever, maybe not every year, but, so then the daughter that's right underneath her, she's she's in 7th grade. She's a little bit younger and a little smaller, so the gun doesn't really fit her the best, but she's kind of getting a little interested in it. I mean, she had a doe tag last year and she went out hunting and she's a little apprehensive about it, but it just made me think, it's like, okay, this trap shooting gets these kids into hunting. Because I was really surprised. There's lots of kids that I knew are hunters, like are really big hunters in high school in the last 5 years, but they don't shoot on the trap team. That was really interesting to me. And I don't know if it wasn't cool or they thought it wasn't, a challenge. I mean, you shot trap and it's a challenge. I mean,
yeah.
You go one day hitting 24 out of 25 and the next day you're like at 10. At least that's me, right? But
yeah.
So when I started thinking about trapping and the predator hunting as a whole and stuff like that, I'm like, these kids that are in school, they don't have a clue what trapping or predator hunting is, especially now that a lot of families don't do it anymore. And it just goes to show people out there that getting them, involved in outdoor shooting sport like trap, they're making hunters out of them. And maybe some type of an education program in schools for the other side of being in the outdoors would maybe make more trappers. I mean, I know there was a younger fellow here around the area that I learned about this last winter that all of a sudden wanted to start trapping and join the North Dakota Farmers and Trappers Association and that's kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, that's great. I haven't heard of a young person wanting to trap in a long time,
Right.
And just trying to figure out ways to get the youth involved. I mean, you can have stuff that's voluntary to come and people might show up or whatever, but that trapping, that's a good analogy because that's definitely, it has bred way more hunters now in the last however many years this trap league's been going on.
Definitely. And I can remember when I was in 1st grade, 2nd grade, and 3rd grade, all 3 of those years, my grandpa would arrange it with whoever my teacher was, and he would actually come in and he would bring fox fur and coyote fur and skunks and raccoons and beaver and all those kind of stuff. And he would bring in a bunch of different types of traps. And he would, this is back in the early 90s when the real kind of the crux of the war, the anti-trapping war, was really very intense.
Yeah.
And so his idea was he didn't really care if they started trapping or not, but he wanted them to kind of not see trappers as a negative.
Sure.
And so he'd bring in all that stuff, and that was back when PETA would have advertisements on TV showing, a mangy coyote that was chewing on his foot in a trap and all this kind of stuff. And it's so inhumane and all that kind of, it's truly bullshit is what it is.
Yeah, I agree.
But he would take a fox trap and he'd set a 1.5 coil spring or whether it was a 1.5 coil spring or a muskrat trap or whatever it was, and he would just put his hand, he'd put his fingers in there, all 4 of his fingers, and snap the trap on his hand, and just to show them that it doesn't actually hurt the animal. He was 60 some, or he was in his 50s then, I suppose. But I mean, just to kind of put that impression in their mind that we're not a bunch of savages, and then take all the pass all the furs around and let them pet all the furs and show them pheasant wings and just all kinds of stuff. And the teacher would allow him to come in there for 45 minutes or whatever it was, and he'd do his spiel and answer a bunch of questions and just kind of have a good time with it. And honestly, I think we need more of that. The one thing that I think is going to help the number of trappers grow is the fact that it's starting to become more mainstream again, because there are shows out there like Meat Eater Randy Newberg, he does some trapping segments and every once in a while on YouTube. Meat Eater does at least one episode a year, whether it's beaver trapping or whatever it might be. And, you know, they're also showing, I mean, I'm not going to eat a coyote.
I won't. I've skinned too many. In fact, I got a few to skin tonight, and there's no way I'll ever eat a coyote.
I've never been that hungry. However, I have eaten beaver before, and beaver is actually pretty darn good. You can take the hindquarters off of a beaver and put it in a crock pot, just like you would a pot roast with potatoes, carrots, onions, and some beef broth. And after 6 hours, it tastes like pot roast. I mean, it's quite good. But just showing them and kind of telling them why we trap and the traditions, the deep history that goes all the way back to, you know, the 1700s, and kind of talking about that and the fact that we're not just killing these animals to kill them. There's a real reason why we're out there trapping, other than the fact that it's highly enjoyable and it's very difficult. It's something that's it's a real art form. I think that's going to help recruit more trappers in the future.
Yeah, and that's one of my goals as a fur person, I'm going to say. I mean, this podcast is part of it. You know, I decided I've been a long time podcast listener of all sorts of podcasts. I mean, I listen to, you know, there's lots of them out there, Rogan and Meat Eater, and I listen to yours, and I listen to Trapping Today. I mean, all these podcasts, and it's great content. And, you know, of course I'm interested in it. So of course it's, you know, it's good fun for me, but you know, I think that there just needs to be conversations like this. And myself as a trapper and a fur person, I mean, I always try to educate and show people. You know, I walk around with my fur hat all the time during the wintertime, and now people don't give me a weird look anymore. But it's just about getting that out there and like you said, showing people that, yeah, trappers aren't savages. It's really tough. I mean, you're trying to get an animal to stick their foot in a trap that's the size of, you know, a silver dollar. I mean, it's pretty hard, but it's fun, and it's something that's challenging and something that hopefully continues on. So yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think that, you know, I think that kids don't know what they don't know, of course, and bringing on something new like that might be a break for them, other than sticking their nose in the phone all the time or whatever, like you said.
Right. You know, it's if you show me a trapper at it doesn't matter what organizational group it is, whether it's Backcountry Hunters and Angler Group or Pheasants Forever or whatever, if there's a person in there that's also a trapper, I guarantee you, 100% guarantee you that is the best outdoorsman in the room.
Yep.
There's just something about you know, it's something that you learn after trapping for so many years. We just look at fields differently. I can tell you with a high degree of certainty where fox and coyotes are going to run. I can tell you with a very high degree of certainty which abandoned buildings have skunks and raccoons. I can tell, you know, we just notice things that the average guy out there chasing pheasants or chasing deer doesn't notice. You know, and I'll also tell you right now that there's not very many trappers out there that also aren't hunters and aren't fishermen.
Right.
You'll find fishermen that never hunt, and you'll almost never find a hunter that doesn't fish. But I guarantee you that there's not very many trappers out there that don't also hunt and fish.
Right. I agree.
You know, it just makes you a more well-rounded outdoorsman.
So let's right before I wrap up here. It's been great talking to you. So, you know, you got your Birds, Booze, and Buds podcast. You've been doing it now for quite a while, and I was on here back in late November of 22, and you always have some really good content. You got anything new coming up for the new year? I mean, you're doing more podcasts and stuff like that. I mean, any new content stuff you're doing, or anything that your listeners or my listeners can look forward to?
Sure. I just did that podcast today with Doug Duran, which is going to be, I'm actually going to release that tomorrow. This time of the year, I always kind of struggle a little bit for content because this is kind of the doldrums of winter for me, where I'm I'm not going to say I'm depressed, because I'm not, but I'm also just ready to do something. So when I got back from Arizona at the end of January, I did a whole bunch of podcasts. I was pumping out one a week, sometimes a couple a week. And then now for the last couple of weeks, I haven't put anything out. But I'm going to put out that one with Doug tomorrow. And Doug came on. He got a hold of me after seeing the announcement about the new Pheasants Forever chapter, that I was the president and this and that. But he's got this. He's calling it the Share the Land Initiative, and is what it is. He's a small landowner, well, small by our standards, but he's a landowner from over in Wisconsin. The farm's been in his family for 120 years, and one of the things that we talked about on the podcast is kind of this disconnect now between hunters and landowners, and a lot of that has to do with in the West. I hunt a lot of public land myself here in North Dakota, whether it would be refuges or waterfowl production areas or plots or whatever it might be. But there's a lot of people that are kind of these public land warriors that I have huge respect for. These guys that are out there elk hunting and stuff like that on public land. But is what it's created is it's kind of, and apps like Onyx certainly have made it a lot easier now to find public pieces of land where you can hunt.
I use Onyx.
But we've kind of lost.
I use Onyx all the time. It's great. It's a great app. Really a great app.
Me too. Yeah, they're one of my sponsors. And even when I was driving out to Stanley today, even though I know how to get to Stanley from Minot, I had my Onyx app open on my Apple CarPlay on the dash of my Ford pickup, just driving down the highway looking at landowner.
I do the same thing for trapping, because it works great for trapping. There's some trapping icons on there now, and I'm glad they did that, because it was great, because I use it for hunting. And yeah, I do the same thing. So I'm glad I'm not the only weirdo out there.
No, not at all. But one of the things that we've kind of lost is hunters have lost the ability to gain permission on a piece of land. So is what the Share the Land Initiative is he's actually got, I think they're in 38 states now. He has landowners that are registering parcels of land, and then he's kind of playing almost like intermediary. So if you're what he calls a seeker, an access seeker, you go on the website and you fill out what he calls his conservation resume, which you just tell him a little bit about yourself, what you're going to be out there wanting to hunt, this and that, and he'll match the people that are seeking access to landowners that are allowing access. And where the Share the Land kind of comes in is, maybe this landowner over here, you come out for a weekend during the summertime and help me roll up some old fence or something like that. And then you, in repayment of you coming out and volunteering some of your time, I'll give you access to some of my land to hunt this fall. And it's a really cool initiative. So that's going to be all on the podcast I'm going to release tomorrow. And then kind of on the same vein, I'm going to be doing a couple of podcasts. It's just going to be me talking about how I go about getting permission from landowners. And I'll tell you, it's not going out there the night before pheasant season opens and asking for permission when they're in the middle of harvest. That's just a little tip for all of you guys out there that are looking for access. That's not the best time in the world.
Probably the wrong time. Probably the wrong
time. They're very busy. They have a lot of stuff going on that time of the year. This is actually a really good time of the year to go out and start trying to cultivate some relationships and getting access for the fall. So I'm going to do a little series on that. I got a bunch of stuff. I got turkey licenses in North Dakota and in South Dakota this year. So I'm going to be doing some podcasts on that. Bunch of fishing, dog training stuff throughout the summer. And then usually starting in late July, I'm really ramping up stuff in preparation for the bird season. And once September 1st gets here, I'm full throttle until end of January, pretty much when I get back from Arizona. So
sounds like full plate.
Yeah, I keep pretty busy. It's I wrote an article here a couple years ago for the Project Upland magazine called "The 365-Day-a-Year Bird Hunter," and it's basically based off my schedule. I mean, it's you can break it down from September 1st through the hunting season. Once hunting season's over, I'm out cultivating those relationships with landowners, doing some trapping, trying to take some of the predators off the landscape. Come spring, I'm dog training and out doing some scouting. And then July gets here and I'm out running my dogs, getting them into shape and kind of tightening them back up on their bird manners and scouting. And then, I mean, it really is just kind of a 365 day a year thing for me. And so it's, there's not a ton of off season. However, this year, the off season, usually by now, there's some good fishing going on and the shorelines are opening up and I'm down fishing catfish and northerns down on Lake Skakawea. But sadly this year it hasn't been an option just yet. So
it'll be different this spring for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it sounds like you have I'm going to have to listen to some of those podcasts, and you always put out great content. And I'm the same thing. It's like I'm just getting done with something. And it's like I want the fall to come, but there's a lot of work that can be done in between as far as permissions and stuff like that. So that'll be interesting podcast to listen to, because that'll pertain to whatever you're hunting, whether it be birds or deer or pheasants or coyotes or trapping or whatever. It probably applies to everything.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, I think it's a good place to stop. I think this was a great podcast, and I really do appreciate, Tyler, you coming on here and kind of just chatting for a while. A lot of good information. You're definitely a good resource for bird hunting, and you have a unique relationship with trapping, so you can really kind of talk about that bird to trapping, bird to fur type relationship that you see, since you have that background in trapping. So it was great to have you on, and I want to thank you again for coming on.
For sure, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm glad you started one of these things.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. So we'll talk sometime in the future.
Sounds good, buddy. Let me know. Okay.
There you go, guys. Episode 9, Tyler Webster with the Bird, Booze, and Buds podcast. He's an avid upland hunter, chases Huns, chases Sharptails, loves hunting pheasants in the snow. He's got some great content over in his podcast, so give him a follow. You got any questions? You can email me at info@volkfurs.com. I do have a Instagram page. I have a Facebook page. I also have a Etsy page that I have some fur accessories listed on there. If you're interested in a pair of gauntlet mittens or a fur hat or something like that. So check it out. I'm also putting these podcasts up on YouTube. So if you're a YouTuber and you want to, have your YouTube up at work or at home, whatever, and just listen to podcasts, I am putting these podcasts up on there. So thanks again for listening. I would appreciate a follow, subscribe on YouTube. Got any questions? You know how to get a hold of me. So until next time, take care. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the most recent episode of the Volk Furs podcast. If you have any questions or comments, suggestions, please email me at info@volkfurs.com. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook, or you can contact me via my website at volkfurs.com.